Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back. This is Coffee Talk. Today's class is dedicated for the refuah shleima of Nechama bat Naama and for the success by Meirav Meshi bat Nechama. Shav refuah shleima and lots of success. All right, so we're talking about the Jewish vision of happiness, and happiness is an important conversation to have. We just spoke about Tu B'Shvat last week. And we said in a nutshell that Tu B'Shvat is about creating a process for growth and recognizing that in the darkness of winter, when all hope seems lost, that it's this time of the year where the branches, which look seemingly dead on the outside, are actually drawing out their sap from their roots and beginning to reemerge and to reanimate themselves. Life is going to start coursing through those branches, and God willing, in about 6 weeks, we'll start seeing little buds on the ends of those branches. So there's hope even in a time of darkness. So what I want to do is like this. This topic on happiness is not an easy one to have. And the reason why it's a complicated topic is because we've already bought into all kinds of notions as to what we think happiness is. You have a communal vision of happiness, you have a societal vision of happiness, you have a religious vision of happiness. And it's not always aligned with what Judaism thinks happiness ought to be. Yeah. We're going to get to that 100%. We're going to say that ultimately that happiness in Judaism is a choice. And most people have a hard time with that. What do you mean happiness is a choice? I wake up, I'm not happy. What should I do about it? Isn't happiness something I should just feel? And the answer is not really. And I'm going to explain why. But what I want to do first I want to talk to you a little bit about why happiness is such an important part of what it means to be human. Why happiness is such an important part of the human experience. So I brought down a couple of things I found out there online. And the first one is written by the American Psychological Association. Okay, and this is what they wrote. Compared with Americans in 1957, today we own twice as many cars per person, eat out twice as often, and enjoy endless other commodities that weren't around then. Big screen TVs, microwave ovens, SUVs, handheld wireless devices, to name a few. But are we any happier? So compared with our grandparents today, young adults have grown up with much more affluence, slightly less happiness, and much greater risk of depression and assorted social pathology. Notes Hope College psychologist David G. Mayers, PhD. Our becoming much better off over the last 4 decades has not been accompanied by and one iota of increased subjective well-being. People with strong materialistic values appear to have goal-orientations that may lead to poor well-being. At Knox College psychologist Tim Kasser, PhD. Kasser describes his and other researchers showing that when people organize their lives around extrinsic goals, such as product acquisitions, they report greater unhappiness in relationships, poor moods, and psychological problems. So you see, you would think that on the base level, well, maybe I would be happier if I made a little bit more money, or maybe I'd be happier if I had more things, right? But we live in the most affluent generation in history. Whatever you have, or whatever little you have more than almost every king that lived before you. You are living in a world of tremendous amount of, what's that? That's right. But the challenge is that for many people, those are extras. For many people, the measurement of success, the measurement of simcha, is by how many toys you have, by how many cars you drive, how many vacations you're able to go on. And that is definitely not a measure of success. Are those things somewhat important? Yes, you need to have the basic necessities be part of society. I'm not advocating that you live in a world of complete asceticism where you remove all gashmiut, all physical pleasure. That's not what I'm saying at all. But just be mindful that you think today in 2022, with everything that we know about the human mind, the psychology, with everything that we know about what makes a person happy, we're seeing that people are not happier. They're living in a world of more depression. I just had a student this week who unfortunately was she had to be taken to the hospital because of her suicidal thoughts. Because she had suicidal thoughts. She's 21 years old. Comes from an affluent family, educated, beautiful girl, but she's stuck. She's going to a place for a few months to get the help that she needs. How does that happen? In America, the seventh cause of death, okay, was suicide. It used to be diabetes. In America today, you have a higher chance of committing suicide than developing diabetes. It's insane. Right? This just happened last year with COVID. I guess those numbers went up. But look at Wikipedia. This is from their piece on suicide. A 2006 report by the WHO states that nearly 1 million people take their own lives every year, more than those murdered or killed in war. It's crazy. This is the wealthiest, educated, most powerful country in the world, and yet here, with everything that we have, every opportunity that we have close to 1 million people committing suicide. It's crazy. So the WHO figures show that a suicide takes place somewhere in the world every 40 seconds. In 1998, the World Health Organization ranked suicide as the 12th leading cause of death worldwide. Not only in America, we're talking about globally. In most countries, the infanticide of the incidences of suicide is higher than the incidences of intentional homicides. That means more people are killing themselves than killing other people. Approximately 30,000 people die by suicide each year in the United States. That number is higher, according to the National Institute of Mental Health. This is an old statistic. Suicide as a contagion is a serious problem, especially for young people. Most of the people that are committing suicide are around the age of 35. They're generally white males. The group of people, white males, are committing more suicide in this country than women. And now white males is a very interesting demographic because white males are the most privileged group of people in America, right? They have the most opportunity, the highest education, the highest salary bracket. What's that?
Pressure too.
It's lots of things. Okay, so let's see Rabbi Yerucham Lubavitch. Da'at Chochmah. He says I'm on the top of page 2. He says people become so used to being unhappy that they're unaware of the needless misery they cause themselves. Should I read that again? People become so used to being unhappy that they are unaware of the needless misery they cause themselves. They imprison themselves by filling their minds with thoughts of resentment, hatred, envy, and desires. It's amazing how they tolerate such a life. They mistakenly think that it is impossible for life to be any different. Now, he's describing a choice. You see, some of you may think, that the thoughts that you have, you're not in control of. Rabbi, it just popped into my head. What should I do? Oh, push it out of your head. Why do you allow your thoughts, your emotions, to define your mental state of being? And the answer is you shouldn't. But if you haven't disciplined yourself yet to have a disciplined mind, then of course you'll be moving back and forth emotionally. You wake up and you're feeling not the best, right? You jump into the shower, right? You do some push-ups or whatever it is, and you stand up straight, you stop slouching, and you turn the frown upside down, and you generate a feeling of simcha. When you feel unhappy, don't allow yourself to remain in that state of unhappiness. Don't allow yourself to obsess about negative thoughts. Push them away. Start trying to bring in positive thoughts. We're going to talk about practical ways of doing it. David Brooks, columnist of the New York Times, advice for high school students. This is in 2009. He says like this. He says, I used to believe that life got better as you got older, but now I realize this is not true. At the moment, I'm thinking of talking about the chief way our society is messed up. That is to say, it is structured to distract people from decisions that they have a huge impact on happiness in order to focus attention on decisions that have marginal impact on happiness. The most important decision any of us make is who we're going to marry. Yet there are no courses on how to choose a spouse. There's no graduate department in spouse selection studies. Institutions of higher learning devote more resources to semiotics than love. The most important talent any person can possess is the ability to make and keep friendships or friends. And yet here too, there is no curriculum for this. How do you choose a friend? The most important skill a person can possess is the ability to control one's impulses. Here too, we're pretty much on our own. There are all things which, with a reprovable relationship to human happiness. Instead, society is busy preparing us for all the decisions that we have marginal effect on human happiness. There are guidance offices to help people in the monumental task of selecting a college. There are business schools offering lavish career placement services. There's a vast media apparatus offering minute advice on how to furnish your home and expand your deck. To get information on private affairs, you have to go down market to you have to go down to the market Oprah or Dr. Phil. Why are they the ones who have access to information on meeting life's vital needs? Why is it that in the places that we need the most amount of help, there is no institution, no place to go to find that meaning? And this is part of the consumerism that this country has been teaching for 180 years. Ever since the Industrial Revolution, we've lost focus and touch about what it means to be a meaningfully happy person. If you were going to university 180 years ago, and you went to Harvard University and you wanted a degree, you only had a couple of options for your degree. You know what they were? One is in theology, and the other one was philosophy, the philosophy of morality. Why? Theology is about understanding God, how you become a better person, and philosophy of morality is the same thing, but just using a different system to get there. But instead today, you become a doctor, you go to law school, you go to medical school, you go to law school to become a lawyer. How did you become a lawyer and a doctor 200 years ago? Why is it that a student would go to school to learn about theology and philosophy and not medicine? What changed? Well, I'll tell you what changed. What changed was we understood that the world was changing and it was all about moving things very quickly. And in order to create a system of education, we had to take kids out of school, out of factories, take them out of the jobs because they were taking the jobs away from the adults. Give them an education, but the education wasn't about improving their lives. It wasn't about teaching them how to have a happier, more meaningful life. It was teaching them about compliance. We send our kids to school today not to teach them to have critical thinking skills, but instead to comply. The teacher said sit down. The teacher said study this, even though it makes no sense. How does this assignment teach me to become an independent thinker? And we understand this intuitively as children. This doesn't make any sense. Why are we learning this? Why is this part of the curriculum? Why are they forcing us to do this ridiculous work? It makes no sense. Because we understand as children that ultimately we want to be independent. And therefore the curriculum that we should be taking in schools is to teach us how to think independently, how to become people that could live on our own, how to make our own choices, how to live a life of happiness and meaning. But that's not what happens. So if you were a student and you wanted to go into medicine and law, the only way you get that education is through apprenticeship. You had to find another doctor and a lawyer to say, or an accountant for that matter. That was not a course in college. Real estate was not a course in college. You had to find someone who was doing it already and apprentice from them. Now, if I was lawyer, doctor, accountant, why would I want to apprentice you? Who am I going to want to apprentice? I'm going to want to apprentice someone who went to Harvard. Why? Because he spent the last 4 years on clarifying what it means to be a healthy, moral human being. He spent time clarifying what his values are about. He spent his time developing a critical mind. Oh, you did that kind of work? You did your Hitbodedut for 4 years? That's what real college was about, not today going to school to get a career. How many doctors today are depressed? How many lawyers today are unhappy? Making a lot of money, have all that kavod, all that prestige, but yet they're stuck. Because those external pursuits, while they're important, that's not who we are at the core, our essence. Something more about who we are. So Rabbi Akiva Tatz over here in this conversation on happiness says the real definition of happiness is the response when you feel when you are one, moving towards a meaningful destination. If you feel that what you're doing right now is not getting you to a more meaningful place, you're not going to experience happiness. Number 2, he says along the correct path. Number 3, against resistance. And 4, that you're making progress. What does against resistance mean? That means that if you're doing something that is super easy, you're on a course that requires 0 effort, you're not overcoming something, you're in trouble. Most people are unhappy at their jobs because the job does not create enough resistance to allow them to feel like they're growing on an individual, personal kind of level. So we need to put ourselves into places, into positions, into situations where we're able to grow. If you don't feel like you're growing where you are, you're setting yourself up to feel unhappy. Now, if your job doesn't give you that type of resistance, then push yourself, do more. Either do something different in the place that you're in and grow. Try to take on new responsibilities. Try to find a new way to do what you're doing. But if you're doing the same thing and it's not leading you anyplace meaningful, you're not going to be happy. So it's very simple. Number one, again, moving toward a meaningful destination. Number two, along a correct path. What is the correct path? The correct path would be the path that allows you to express the best version of yourself. If what you're doing does not allow you to express the best of you, you're not going to find simcha. Resistance, and you got to make progress. Okay, let's see what Rockefeller says. He says like this. He says that the road to happiness lies in two simple principles. Find what interests you and that you can do well in, and put your whole soul into it, every bit of energy and ambition and natural ability you have. This is a way of feeling some level of happiness. Elon Musk feels very happy. He's a complicated guy, no question about it. But every single day he has a clear vision of what he wants to accomplish. He sold PayPal for his share was $300 million. Okay, he decided he had all this money as a young man, and he wanted to turn it into something good. He did not own a house. He did not have a couch to sleep on. He took the $300 million that he got from PayPal and threw it all into Tesla. Started Tesla, Solar City, and SpaceX all at the same time. Why? He wanted to solve a problem. The way in which you find happiness is by doing something to make the world better. That was his shtick. He found his own calling. And he turned these companies into multi-billion-dollar companies. Today he's the wealthiest man on planet Earth. He's worth over $200 billion. Right? He has a very clear vision. He's moving. Staying static, doing the same thing over again, is recipe for depression. Viktor Frankl, Mishnah Ketubot, look what it says over there. This is straight out Mishnah. Idleness leads to mental illness. I wish some of the people in our government would have learned this Mishnah. Maybe they would think a little bit differently about how we lock down our society. Idleness leads to mental illness. If you feel like you're doing nothing for a long period of time, you will become Majnun, become crazy. Viktor Frankl, right? Viktor Frankl, a famous psychologist from the concentration camps, said man is... What's that? Yes.
It's Enpo Khatat.
Enpo?
All Khatat, all the sins from Batala.
That's right. That's also true. There's another. That's right. There's a source that says that all of our sins, all of our wrongdoings, come from idleness. Viktor Frankl says man is always reaching out for meaning, always setting out on his search for meaning. In other words, what I call the will to meaning is even to be regarded as man's primary concern. Our primary concern should be like, well, what are we living for that's meaningful? It can't just be about a nice vacation at the end of the year or a bonus. It can't just be about going out to fancy restaurants or going out to nice clubs or seeing nice places. There's got to be more to life than just that. Oh, and don't get me wrong. Again, I'm not saying those things can't be meaningful. They can be, but not if those are the primary goals. There's something more that's got to be there. Judith Michelle, Beyond Your Ego, great book, by the way, if you could find it. The major activity of human beings is to extract meaning from their encounters with the world. In the book, Unheard Cry for Meaning, Viktor Frankl quotes a study of 60 students of American universities who had attempted suicide. The reason given for their suicide attempt, of 85% of the students said that what? Life seemed meaningless. What does it mean to live a life of meaning? Where does meaning come from? How do I find meaning? What does that mean? Now, as Jews, we're going to see what Rav Nassan Tzvi Finkel says. He says as follows. He says, man was created to derive pleasure from the Almighty. This is Mesilat Yesharim. This pleasure does not refer to only to the next world, but also to this world. Every person surrounded by limitless potential for pleasure and enjoyment. The world and all its details is a source of pleasure. A person's experience in the physical and the spiritual areas give him the potential for happiness without end. What's he talking about? Oh, you're the rabbi, you're going to give me some kind of religious, like mumbo jumbo. Like, what are you saying? So I'm going to say it like this, okay? Ultimately, if you believe that there is no God, it's going to be very hard for you to make the argument for meaning. There are plenty of atheists today that are struggling with this. How do you create a sense of morality and meaning in a world of atheism, because it's just all random. There's no real sense of anything. Everything was just an accident, and therefore there is no real meaning. And therefore the meaning for them would be them living a more material life, right? And that's it. When you take God out of the picture, who determines what simcha and meaning looks like? And the answer is the individual or the society will determine what it is.
Are you saying, I'm sorry to interrupt, that
Sure.
atheism means no spirituality?
No. Well, yeah. Well, by definition, if you're an atheist and you don't believe in spirituality,
Can't you have inner spirituality?
but how could you say inner? The word spirituality is a contradiction to atheism, because atheism just believes in science.
Correct.
So there is no spirituality in all the science. You can't measure it, you can't touch it, you can't feel it, you can't see it, it doesn't exist. So you could talk about, doing nice things. It's hard. I know atheists like to use the word spirituality, but I know they speak about it, but it doesn't make any sense to me. Do you understand why it makes no sense to me? So now again, I think that this is an important question to ask ourselves. Well, what do we believe in? Right? Do we believe in a world of randomness? Do we believe that everything that we have in our lives is just an accident? That there's no real purpose and meaning to my life? It's just there was a bunch of cosmic rays that crashed and created a big bang, and then 13.4 billion years later, accidentally Earth was in the perfect spot away from the sun so that life can emerge. And there was enough accidents happening on planet Earth with lightnings hitting the cosmic soup on Earth that created enough explosions for a single-celled amoeba to turn into a multiple-celled creature that eventually created fish that ended up on land, and through evolution and over time and millions of years, you have this perfect thing called a human mind that is able to reason. It's just an accident. I reject that idea. I don't see that as a matter of fact, most scientists today are beginning to reject that idea. And they're answering it in a very interesting way. They're saying, well, we're not ready to say God, but we're ready to speak about aliens. They call it panspermia, that aliens have seeded life on other planets by sending their DNA there, and that's how we have life emerging on planets. Because it's too difficult to explain how one protein, you understand this for a minute, just listen to this for a second. To make one protein in your body, you have to have 25 million strands of DNA letters perfectly align themselves. 25 million strands of DNA. So align, that's like me telling you there are 25 million letters on these sheets, okay? I'm gonna cut out each letter, I'm gonna put them in a little bag, I'm gonna fly into a helicopter and throw them out of the helicopter. And when we land, all the letters are going to line themselves back perfectly to create these 11 sheets that are legible, and so on and coherent and so on and so forth. That's what you want me to believe? I can't accept that. So they're going to say we can't accept it either, but we believe that some intelligent life force, sent that information to the planet that we're on right now. Okay? So I'm going to argue that ultimately, if you want to get to a place of a deeper kind of meaning, it has to come from outside of ourselves. It's got to come from an infinite being. And therefore, part of what I'm going to argue is that, of course, you can be happy without God. But I'm going to say that there's two kinds of happiness. There's happiness, true inner happiness, and then what I call counterfeit happiness. Right? Fake happiness. Right? What's that? Fish happiness. It's not real happiness, but there is this kind of happiness you can live your life with. And by the way, people have this. People are married, they're in relationships where they have counterfeit happiness marriages, but that's not real. It's lacking substance and depth. It happens to be that we're there because it makes sense. This is two people.
But isn't it an objective thing? What's one person, or subjective rather? I mean, one person's happiness is not necessarily another person's happiness. How do you define happiness?
We're going to get to that. I'm going to say that happiness, and we're going to see this later on.
But that's not really what we're trying to pinpoint. It's not, you're right. Life and happiness is very subjective. What we're trying to pinpoint is, even if it's subjective, where is true happiness? Where does it lie?
Right.
Okay. Where is really the
How do you define happiness?
So we're gonna so.
Definitely not by material stuff.
No, so so you're right. So meaning, like, I would say, well, you would agree if I told you that if someone says, well, for me, happiness is just like driving really fancy cars, right? Now you could say, well, that's subjective, right? That's what he needs, and that's happiness and happiness. And I would say that's counterfeit happiness.
Yeah, that's kind of shallow.
Why? Why is that then? Well, who determines what is happiness? So again, all I'm saying is that, again, I'm the rabbi, and I'm saying this from a spiritual, religious place. I'm going to argue that happiness is tied into the development of yourself. And that's going to be the theme of what I think happiness really is at its core.
But okay, so let's just go back to the
Sure.
atheist for a second. The atheist,
Yes.
even if he doesn't believe that this is all created by God, that doesn't
Yeah.
mean he's automatically a hedonist. He could, on his own, come to the awareness that, look at these people around me, and these people, I have needs, and
Yeah.
I have compassion for
You
other
could.
people. I mean, these are things that can come internally,
Right.
and you could become a moral person without seeing as it all comes from God.
You could try to do that. It's very hard to argue that and win that argument. So if I'm an atheist and you told me, well, yeah, I really think that it's my responsibility to take care of humanity, I would say that's nonsense. It doesn't fall in line with evolution, because evolution is all about survival of the fittest. I would argue that you're making a mistake by taking care of these weak people.
But we're in an evolved society.
No, maybe that we actually stopped evolution because we're not allowing the weak people to die.
We're not allowing
The weak people to die. The people who cannot take care of themselves, the people who cannot get a job, the people who are incompetent are slowing and hurting society. And that us supporting those people is a mistake. We're just feeding a cancer in society. Why would you want to do that? That's selfish. I've heard that argument being made. Now, obviously, I reject that. I think that's crazy. But if you think of it with the problem and the challenge, not the problem, the challenge with science is that, like, who's going to be the moral arbitrator of truth? It'll be whoever makes the best philosophical, scientific argument. And and therefore it's really man deciding what is, moral and immoral. And therefore, so there's a limitation to what. Now, there's a famous. His name is David Harris. Is one of the most famous atheists alive today. He's Jewish, of course, and he's also a well-known professor of physics. So he's brilliant, and he's been working for 8 years now to come up with some type of moral principle without religion. And him and Ben Shapiro, and actually there was a great, if you want to look at it, some really awesome, not him and Ben Shapiro, it was really him and Jordan Peterson, Professor Jordan Peterson, and David Harris had like a road show where they went out and had these like 4 conversations about God, meaning, and morality. And there's lots of fascinating conversation. It was like hours, it's like long, but it's definitely worth listening to. It's very deep stuff. So I can't impart that to you here, but I'll tell you that the conversation ended with David Harris conceding that it's really hard for the atheist to get to a point of morality and ethics and a real sense of what meaning is without religion. And so much of what he would argue is meaningful and moral comes from religion. It's very hard to just get rid of that stuff. Like, you intuitively say, let's take care of the poor. Well, where does that idea come from? Remember, Sodom was not a place of chesed. There were societies in the ancient world that believed exactly what I just said, that no, get rid of the weak. Lot's daughter was killed, was punished by death because she fed a poor person. How did they know? Because in Sodom, if you had a poor person, a beggar, he should die within a few months because no one's allowed to feed him. They found this beggar, he was still alive. It's been 3 months. Someone's feeding him. They waited, they found her. You know how they tortured her? You know what they did to her? They took her into the middle of Sodom. They ripped off her clothing. They took honey. They smeared her body with honey. They brought bees. And they watched her being stung to death for days. What's that? Because in their society, they believe that weakness has to be stomped out. You don't deserve to live. And we don't want to live in a society of weakness. We want to live in a society of strength. It's crazy. But that was the conclusion they came to without God. She felt, because she comes from the house of Lot, the house of Abraham, she understood this concept of chesed, this concept of going outside of the norm and yet helping the needy and so on and so forth. The Germans didn't believe in that stuff. They came to the conclusion, as a society, it's okay to kill Jews. They rationalized it. If you live in a world without God, and you live in a world of atheism, I could hear the argument of getting rid of the Jews. Why not?
But it's not a necessary conclusion.
What? But it can't. But it's hard to argue it away, because we're saying that morality without God comes from your society, right? And if your society determines something as being,
That's what I'm thinking is, it's not as a movement, is that there are ethical atheists.
Yeah, right.
there are ethical atheists, and there
Yes,
are. But
I'm
I'm
not
gonna,
with it.
there are. But just be mindful that their ethics comes from the Judeo-Christian Bible.
For sure.
You know what I'm saying? It's not coming from it's not in a vacuum.
But
They
they-
want to believe that there
They
is,
have it. They have it.
but where did it come? What's the source of it?
The source is us.
That's my point.
But
That's
they
my
have it.
point. I'm not saying they don't have it. I'm not saying there aren't ethical atheists. I'm saying there are. But if you want to just strip away everything and just use complete reason on your own, you're not going to get there. That's my point. You're not going to get there on your own. You need to go through a process of finding the source that says it, and it's going to come right here. It's going to come back to our books. It's our story. It's what we teach the people. We teach the world. It was in Mein Kampf, the book that Hitler wrote in jail. He said that the reason why he hated the Jews is because they put consciousness on man's soul and circumcision on man's body. That's why he believed the Jews had to be wiped off the planet. Right? Okay, so Victor...
And he loved animals.
And he was a very big animal. Yes, I often tell my students that are vegetarians that Hitler was a vegetarian too. Yes, and he loved animals. There's a great piece, maybe we'll do some other time, it's worth mentioning here because we're talking about morality. We know that Rav Kook was a very big advocate for vegetarianism. But not the same kind of vegetarianism that we think of today. He believed that during the week you shouldn't eat meat, and on Shabbat you should have a little bit of chicken or fish. That's it. And he says the reason why we're not allowed to become complete vegetarians is because of the following. Listen how deep this is. He said this over 100 years ago. He said if we stop eating animals because we want to protect the animals, we're creating the false perspective, the false appearance that we've already cared for humanity. If we're going to start being concerned about the welfare of animals, we're going to ignore our responsibility to human beings. And this happens. I know people who would rather give millions of dollars to save the whales than to help the local, soup kitchen across the street, or the elephant, or whatever the cause is. There's a famous guy, 11 years ago in Muncie, secular Jew, who donated $7 million to save the panthers in Africa, and never gave a dime to any Jewish cause. Whatever it was. Which is, I'm not saying we shouldn't care for the planet. We should, but not at the expense of ignoring the needs and the suffering of humanity. So he said, don't become a vegetarian completely because you're going to lose that sense of, he says that until Mashiach comes, we can't become vegetarians. Until we get to a place where we're actually able to respect and care for the needs of the needy, of humanity, until we get there, we of course we shouldn't be cruel to the animals, but we shouldn't completely ignore the needs of the people for the animals. Okay, let's get back.
But would eating meat once a week would remind us that we have to have the poor and the needy?
I'm not saying it does. I'm not saying it's a perfect, but I think his point is that if you completely disassociate yourself from that type of a diet, it's very, on a subconscious level, you might start thinking that I don't need to take care of these people. I need to care for these animals, and therefore he's saying make sure you don't lose the sensitivity for humanity by eating some chicken or shawarma or whatever your protein poison may be.
Well, could it be also that you end up kind of deifying an animal like the Hindus?
Yeah, it could be also. I definitely see that. I mean, there's the Pope's message for Christmas this year was that you got to stop getting dogs and start having children. That globally, more couples today have more animals than they do have children. That never happened before in society, where we're raising animals more than we're raising children. That's already telling you a little bit about the world that we're living in. It may be easier, but it's not more meaningful. Okay, let's keep going. I want to make sure we get to like the juicy parts over here. So look at number 11. We're on page number 3. Rav Noach Weinberg says that next to love of God, all other pleasures are insignificant. You can have a delicious pizza, lots of money, love, power, but humans yearn to transcend the mundane side of daily life. That's why mystery, magic, miracles capture our imagination. When all is said and done, no human being can be truly satisfied unless he reaches out and connects with the infinite transcendent dimension. We all seek to connect with that which encompasses all pleasure, because nothing finite, nothing bound up in this world can compare to the infinite. So Rav Noach says that ultimately there's something deeper here. This deep, profound ability and desire to love God is where simcha happens and comes from. We say this. We say Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu, v'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha b'chol what levavcha u'b'chol meodecha. Right? You have a responsibility to love God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your might. Rabbi Yaakov Friedman says as follows. He says Rabbi Yechitzkel Levenstein was a legendary figure who spent his entire life delving into the Torah that stresses character refinement and the assertion of one's divine soul over the physical instincts. He was a man who made do with a bare minimum and material needs while making constant, ceaseless demands on himself and his students. The cornerstone of his development was laid out and heard by Rabbi Yerucham Levavitz, who emphasized the need for profound work on one's personality in accordance with the Torah ideals. Quote, "When I heard that talk," Rabbi Levenstein later recounted, "I realized that I was spiritually ill and had to do something about it. From that moment onward," Rabbi Levenstein, quote, "the road was always clearly mapped out before me. I have viewed my entire life since then as a ladder towards self-improvement. I have never had a moment of sadness, never had a moment without a clear goal, without a mission. I never had a moment in my life where I felt empty. Everything has been alive and full and bright." So what he's really saying at the core of what he's saying is that once you have clarity as to what your mission is in life, and once you live a life of meaning, that you have a goal-oriented life, you're going to find simcha in every aspect of your life. There's a famous case that was brought to the Chazon Ish, who was the famous rabbi in Bnei Brak in the late 1950s, where a Holocaust survivor asked him, "Rabbi," he says, "I went through so much. I can't find happiness in my life. What should I do? I'm depressed." So the rabbi generally wrote very long, detailed responses in his teshuvot, but here he wrote, "There's no such thing as sadness. It doesn't exist. Sadness doesn't exist." How can you say that? How can you say that sadness doesn't exist? We know sadness exists. And atzivut ba'olam. What does that mean? Someone dies and they're mourning the loss of someone. Isn't that sadness? And he would say no. What does that mean? What is he really saying? He's saying like this, that even in a situation where you're going through hardship and pain, you could still be involved in doing the right thing. Involved in doing the right thing. I'm not saying that you're not going to feel the pain of losing someone, but that's different than sadness. Sadness comes from when you no longer know what to do, where you feel like you're locked, when you feel like you're closed. The letter in Hebrew that represents sadness is the letter Daled. The letter Daled are two intersecting lines going nowhere, a corner. Sadness is when you're sitting alone in the corner. You're stuck. What is the letter for simcha? Chamesh. By the way, the word simcha isn't the word chamesh, 5. How do you write the letter he? He is a daled with a little yod on the bottom. And what's happening over there is that you're expanding away from that corner. There's an expansiveness that is happening in the letter he. It's not an accident that people that are sad are contracting and people that are happy are expanding. Right? You're feeling sad, sit up, smile, right? It'll change your day. Don't allow yourself to be locked in a corner where you're feeling this sense of unhappiness, this uneasy sense of sadness, he's saying. That you could be in every moment burying a parent and be doing the right thing, feeling the loss of a loved one, but not experiencing sadness. There's a difference. Sadness is when you don't know where you're going. Sadness is when you feel like you're stuck and you're lost, when there's no hope. Tu B'Shvat is the opposite of that. There is hope. There is potential. How do we bring simcha? Not an accident that the holiday that comes after Shvat is Adar. We say Mishanichnas Adar, Ma'abeh B'Simcha. When the month of Adar comes in, you have to increase your joy. Well, what does that mean, Rabbi? How do I increase my joy? Does that mean I drink more? I go to more parties? I eat more, sushi? What is it that I need to do in the month of Adar that's supposed to bring my joy in? It's about clarifying who you are, clarifying the mission. It's about recognizing that you're not stuck in the corner, that there is still potential to grow and become more, that you have the opportunity of becoming something much more profound. You're not stuck. The simcha is a choice, ultimately. Your happiness, my friends, is a choice. You can choose to bring more happiness into your life by clarifying where it is that you want to go. And I think that's exactly what he's saying here. He lived, his whole life changed when he realized that every moment of life is an opportunity for greatness, but we all too often trade it for smallness. We trade every moment of our lives for things. We trade it for money. We trade our lives for the work that we do. And again, I'm not make money, make a lot of money, right? Enjoy all the fine things the world has to offer, but not at the expense of clarifying who you are. If you're trading gashmiyut, materialism, for real core happiness, you're not going to find simcha in the fine clothing that you wear. Yeah, you'll feel good maybe for a little bit, but it's going to fade away. Eventually, you'll lose that luster, that desire for those things. You'll realize there's no real meaning in that. We find our simcha from clarifying what it means to be us, what it means to be you. The more you clarify what it means to be you, what your mission, what your goal is, and then living that goal, that's where your simcha comes from. You say it, command the word love, ahavta. You have to command it. It's a choice. You make that choice. Look at number 14, Rabbi Osher Chaim Levine. He says Judaism is not much a religion as is a relationship. It is only through mitzvah observance that a man can build a deep, enduring, and meaningful relationship with God. That a mitzvah is the very process of forging the bond with God is contained within the very word mitzvah, command, closely related to the word savta, meaning a connection or a binding. Ramchal, this is the next point. I'm going to expand this point as well in a moment. He says as follows. He wrote this in Mesilat Yesharim. He says, man was created for the sole purpose of deriving pleasure from the closeness to God and enjoying that splendor of His presence. For this is the truest delight and the greatest pleasure that can be conceived of. He wrote this in the 1700s in Amsterdam. In Rome. In Amsterdam. The setting for this pleasure to be fully actualized is in the next world. The true perfection is only that of being close to God. And only this true goodness, while everything else people think is goodness, is worthlessness and futility. In order for an individual to reach this perfection, it is appropriate that he earn it through the fruits of his labor. This means that he should make the attempt to cleave to God in actions which further that end. These actions are the mitzvot. Okay, Rabbi, I see what you're doing over here. This is a bait and switch. You're telling me right now that the only way I can be happy is if I keep the Torah commandments. I'm saying that and I'm not saying that. I'll explain. Is it better to do something because you intuitively know it or because someone else asked you to do it? Let me explain. It was many years ago. I was a campus rabbi. I was at Brooklyn College. And every semester, at the beginning of the semester, I'd walk into the SUBO, the Student Union Building. And remember that? And I would go ahead and meet all the fraternities, all the sororities, and just introduce myself. And and then someone told me, Rabbi, you never walked into the atheist club. It's all Jews. I'm like, it is? Okay, I'm going to invite them for a Shabbat. Maybe they'll do like an atheist Shabbat dinner at my house or whatever it is. So I walked into this club. And I'm like, hi, I'm the rabbi, shalom, whatever it is, I walk in. And I introduce myself, I do my shtick. If you need anything, I'm happy to help. You need space in the Hillel, you need space on campus, whatever it is. They're like, thank you so much for coming, Rabbi. You're the first rabbi that had the courage to walk in here. But can I ask you, David, the president says, can I ask you something? He's like, sure. He says, we're very different, you and I. I'm like, why is that? He says, well, because you do good because you believe God told you to do good. You do good because God tells you that you need to do good. He's like, I do good because I intuitively know what is good. And therefore, I am better than you.
I can't believe this. Wow.
Right?
That's heavy. Wow.
So listen to what I said to him. I said to him, I respectfully disagree. I think I'm better than you. So he said, why? I said, I'll give you an example, okay? I said, let's say it's January, whatever today, 19th, whatever the date is today, or January 18th, right? And I said, on January 18th, once a year, they give you the LSATs, and you want to go to law school. And in my scenario, it's only once a year you take this test. And it happens to be that you dedicated your mission, your life work is to bring heaters to old people who are needy of heat in the cold weather. On January 18th is going to be the coldest day of the year. And you have a choice to make now. You're either going to deliver these heaters, and miss the test, or take the test and not be able to deliver the heaters, and you can't give it to anybody else. That's my example. What do you do? He's like, of course I take the test. I said, that's the difference between me and you. I said, the difference between me and you is that I would be obligated to deliver those heaters, and that's why I'm greater than you. You see, in their world, it's always going to be subjective. I do whatever I want to do, right? There's nothing obligating them. If I feel good about it today, I'll do it. If I don't feel good, then I won't do it, right? There's no real meat behind the things that they call moral truths. It's always going to be somewhat subjective. And I'm saying that like this, as Jews, if you believe that there is a God, then you have to believe that God created the world with a purpose, that the world has meaning to it. And if you believe that, then I'm going to argue that that purpose and meaning had to have been communicated. Because if there was no communication, then the purpose and the meaning cannot serve its purpose. Period. I'm going to argue that that communication happened in this week's Torah reading, right? Parashat Yitro, right? God comes down and tells us the Aseret HaDivrot, the 10 Commandments. If there was no communication, we don't know. Why does God do all of this? To tell you what the meaning and the purpose of life is. Now, I'm certainly not suggesting that if you're not doing all the mitzvot, that you're going to be damned in hell and that you're never going to find happiness. I don't care about what you're doing. People often ask me, well, Rabbi, what denomination of Judaism are you a part of? And I say to them, well, what do you think? They're like, you're Orthodox. I'm like, I'm not Orthodox. Well, what are you? Conservative? Reform? I'm like, no. I'm like, I'm under constructionist. Like, what does that mean, Rabbi? I never heard of that denomination. I'm like, oh, you're going to hear about it right now. I'm starting a new movement of people who recognize that they are part of a process of growth and development. The idea that you're Orthodox, you've arrived, and you're doing everything is insane. No one's doing everything. And just because I'm a part of a group that says that they are, doesn't mean that they are. And I'd much rather feel comfortable enough to say, and I believe that the old world Jews believe this. That's why a girl in the old world, a non-religious person and a religious person could sit on the same bench in the synagogue and respect each other. Because they each saw themselves as at a different point in the process of growth and development. But when denominational Judaism came out, we just broke it, we just split that all in half. We divided everything. And that created a lot of the issues that we have today within our communities and so on and so forth. But if we see ourselves as part of a process of growth and development, if we see ourselves as part of a place of individuals that are able to become something bigger and more, right? That changes everything. So let go of your old notions of what you think mitzvot are about. Oh, I don't do that, it's not for me. Forget about that stuff. The question you should be asking yourself is like this: what are you doing right now to become a 1% better Jew tomorrow? That's the question. That's what Rav Levinson was saying before. He lived a life without sadness because he lived a life where every single day was an opportunity to bring more meaning into his life. If you, and by the way, this is a choice you're gonna have to make. You either believe it's true or not. I can't coerce you to believe it. But I'm not suggesting that tomorrow you become like Naturi Karta, and you throw yourself into some crazy world. Like I think that's insanity. External religious practice to me is not an expression of godliness. Pnimiyut, internal desire to want to be something more, is what God's going to measure your greatness by. He's not going to say, oh, well, you didn't dress this way or you didn't speak that way. He's going to ask, what did you do to understand this a little bit better? How did you create challenge in the world that you're in to become a little bit of a better, greater human being? If you didn't push yourself to achieve something more, if you allowed yourselves to slide into the the rut of just the repetitive nature of your day, and there's no movement and growth in your life, you are going to experience depression. On a spiritual level, you're not going to find fulfillment. And therefore, at the core, because you are Jews, you need to ask yourselves, what are you doing to develop and grow yourselves? This is what Rav Zelik, this is what he says, and this is what David HaMelech says in Tehillim. He said, "Ivdu et Hashem b'simcha." Right? Right? You have an opportunity of serving God with happiness. You have an opportunity of doing what you need to do and bring happiness into your life. Rav Zelik Pliskin, Gateways to Happiness, he says, a convert to Judaism wrote, "Being Jewish has given me happiness, not the ephemeral monetary kind that comes with money and sports and cars, and which passes swiftly, leaving an empty feeling. The happiness that comes with Jewish living has to do with serenity of the soul, wholenessness, and the satisfaction of the deepest level." I had 2 students who just went to the mikveh on Sunday and became Jews. Right? I've been preparing them, like finally, Baruch Hashem, they're 100% Jewish. And they told me, they said the rabbi who was doing the conversion said, listen, they're like, what should we do now? He's like, why don't you go daven? He's like, well, she's like, I davened there, I prayed already. She's like, no, it didn't count. Now it's going to count for the first time. And when he said this to this one girl, she started crying. She's like, not because it didn't have meaning before, but because she could finally do something that has meaning, more meaning, it counts. It was so profound. How many of us feel that way? Like, oh, you have an opportunity to pray in the morning. I'm like, well, I'll do it later. How many of us have spent time understanding what tefillah is? Or I don't like tefillah. Oh, this is the best. Rabbi, Shabbat, it's not for me. Well, why not? I don't feel it. Well, what have you done to try to experience a real Shabbat? What have you done to try to feel a connection to this deeper thing called your religion, your Shabbat? And the answer most of the time is nothing. And if that's true, of course you're not going to feel it. If you're doing nothing for it, I tell people like this, you want your kids to feel Shabbat? You want to feel Shabbat? My question is, what are you doing for Shabbat? How are you bringing some time, some flavor of avodah, of work to make your Shabbat more meaningful? Because if you're not doing that, you're not going to have a meaningful Shabbat. It's going to be like any other day. I want to do two more pieces here, and then I'm going to stop. I'm going to continue this, God willing, in our next talk. I guess this is going to be a part 2 continuation. Okay, so he said the Rambam says as follows. He said this in Hilchot Lulav. He said the happiness that comes from performing mitzvot and the love of God, who commanded us to do the mitzvot, are greater forms of service of God. Anyone who holds himself back from feeling this happiness over divine service can be held accountable, as is written, since you do not serve God, your master, with happiness and a good heart, you will serve your enemies. The only real greatness and honor is that of being happy in the service of God. Perkei Avot says as follows. This is Rabbi Vajia Bartanura. This is a Perush. He says the reward is schar. We say schar mitzvah, right? This means that when a person finds the performance of a mitzvah rewarding and enjoyable, that itself is considered a separate mitzvah. He will therefore be rewarded for both the mitzvah as well as the pleasure he experienced in doing the mitzvah. Right? That's what we say. The reward, the pleasure of the mitzvah is the mitzvah itself. So let's stop over here. What I want to do, God willing, next time we meet is go through practical steps in trying to figure out what your mission, what your purpose is, and real practical steps in bringing more happiness into your lives. Just I want to end with the following. Again, simcha is a choice. Stop allowing your feelings of sadness defining your moment, your day, and instead start creating a picture of where you're going to go and what you're going to accomplish, what you're going to do, and you'll see that sadness will quickly begin to dissipate. May God bless you with simcha, true simcha, and recognize that happiness is all in your control. Have a great day. Thanks for listening.